This etude, which features scales and arpeggios in different formats and key areas, challenges us to continue the musical line amidst all those broken slurs. You may feel the urge to cut off the second note of each slur, but continuing the air through the ends of slurs not only provides more air support for the notes themselves to speak clearly, but also creates more forward motion, keeping those scales and arpeggios moving towards a phrase-ending goal. Here's what this etude might sound like if I cut off all the ends of the slurs. Now, here's how it would sound if I continue the line forward with my air. Cutting off the ends of slurs can be useful to music in certain contexts, but in this etude specifically, cutting off slurs can lead to an uneven distribution of notes throughout the measure, or in simpler terms, an uneven tempo. When music jumps around 2.5 octaves in the span of a measure, or even just dances around a key area without actually playing the notes in order, say scales and thirds, we uncover the reality that intonation tendencies differ when ascending versus descending. The notes above the staff require a lot more support in the air and embouchure to play in tune, but as we descend onto and below the staff, the reed needs more freedom to vibrate through a more relaxed embouchure and more freely moving air. If we don't execute these physical changes properly, we don't get much stability in our intonation. Say we're playing a G major scale, 1 octave. If we don't return on the descent to the intonation level we started at in the beginning of the scale, there's a chance that the intonation on the 2 Gs on the ends won't line up exactly, making the scale feel off. A great way to visualize how to equalize your intonation is to think of support like the gradual increase of crescendos and decrescendos. With dynamics, it's easy for us to push the dynamic up gradually from piano to forte, but it's much more challenging to gradually decrease the volume from forte to the same piano you started at within the same amount of time. This translates directly to our support in air and embouchure when ascending and descending. The best way to foster a natural ability to stabilize your intonation no matter what direction you're moving in is to practice with a drone. Most tuner apps and handheld tuners have a drone, or maybe a tone or a sustain setting. If you don't have a drone, you can work with a tuner, but don't pay attention to every single note, only the ones you need to focus on. Let's start with just the first phrase of the etude, the first 4 measures. We end on a half note middle G, which, ironically, is one of the most problematic notes when it comes to equalizing intonation on the way down. Turn your drone on to a G, making it slightly louder than your own playing if possible. Try not to use headphones. This can distort your own ability to hear the intonation and kind of mute what you hear from your instrument, making this exercise a lot more difficult. Play through the first 4 bars, including the G in measure 5, stopping for a moment on every G you play to make sure it matches the drone. If you hear waves between your sound and the drone when you stop on the Gs, that means you're slightly out of tune. As you get closer to the correct intonation, you should be able to hear the waves slow down and eventually disappear. Remember to think of errors in this exercise as tendencies, meaning that's where your playing automatically lands when you're not actively understanding how to fix it yet. Once you understand your tendency in a certain situation, you can anticipate them before they happen in the future. Now, try playing with your drone again, this time anticipating the tendencies that you just discovered. The more you do this, the more natural it will become. There are a few tricky note passages in this etude that can be made a bit easier with some fingering changes. In measure 21 and 22, we have gradually expanded slurred leaps up to D. D is a problematic note when we slur up to it because there's no octave key to differentiate the D on the staff from the fingering for D above the staff. Holding the C vent key down changes the pitch drastically, and major changes in voicing don't always do the trick. For me, the only D that's problematic in this excerpt is in measure 22, beat 2, the slur from F to D. In order to get to the D to speak clearly, flick the C or the D key quickly, then move directly back to the whisper key and low D key for the E flat after. In measure 38 through 41, we have scales and thirds that involve B flats next to F sharps. This automatically tells me to use the front pinky fingering for F sharp instead of making your thumb jump clumsily between the B flat and F sharp keys. You can either use the front pinky F sharp fingering for the entire 4 bars, or you can use the thumb F sharp for every F sharp that isn't directly next to a B flat. I personally use the pinky F sharp only on beat 3 of measures 38 and 40, as it felt more natural for me to use the thumb F sharp for everything else. Do what feels comfortable for you. For measure 45 through 47, I wish I could tell you there's a shortcut for those high A's. Unfortunately, these 3 measures just require slow, deliberate practice of venting and correct fingerings. I promise you it is possible as long as you can anticipate exactly where your fingers should be moving. I can't end this video without talking about my breathing in my performance. From measure 42 to 65, a span of 22 measures that took me about 40 seconds to play, there are no rests. Yay! To execute this without breaking up phrases in awkward places or stopping altogether for a beat or 2 to take a breath, use the sequence in measure 54 through 56 to take a few tiny breaths between those little gestures of 8 notes each. This will build up your air capacity one last time to be able to make it to the next rest. Even with those 2 tiny breaths that I took, I pushed past my air capacity to make it to the end of that phrase in my performance. It wasn't easy, but in order to stick to what Weissenborn wrote, I did what I had to do to make it to the end. If you happen to be able to circular breathe, then good for you, and you can totally disregard everything I just said. Otherwise, good luck.